Hello, this is the Merri-Cast, the show that puts you on the fast track to business confidence. My guest this week is Jude, Jennison. Now, I first met Jude because we were both judges recently in the Business Book Awards, and she's written some really great business books herself. And now she runs her own business, and what an unusual and interesting business it is. She works with herds of horses to create experiential leadership and team experiences, and she's really, really good at it and has transformed thousands of leaders along the way. Her first experience of horses came early and they weren't entirely positive, but as you'll see throughout this interview, she often takes an early knockback or people telling her not to be silly about an idea and turns it to her advantage, sometimes many years later. Here we go.
I'm going to start when I was 9, if that's all right.
That's okay.
And the reason why is because when I was 9, I told my parents that I wanted to work with horses. And my mother said, don't be ridiculous. It's cold and wet in winter and you can't earn any money working with horses. And probably because, like most people, she would have thought that the only job with horses was to either muck out stables or be a riding instructor. And so she told me to get a proper job. And so I abandoned the idea of, and to be fair, I didn't know anything about horses and didn't have any experience with them either. So they gave me 6 riding lessons and I hated it. And the whole time I kept looking at the horses because I was 9, I was riding ponies. And I kept looking at the horses and thinking, I want to be with the big horses, not the small ponies. And then, so I did what my mother told me to do, which is what lots of people did in those days. And I got myself a proper job. So I went off to university and I studied French. And when I left, it was the early 90s and all the graduate recruitment schemes stopped. So nobody was recruiting, not that dissimilar to what's happening today. And I didn't want to be unemployed. So I thought, well, I'll just find a job. So I got a temporary job working in a bookshop and I worked there. It was a 3-week job to put books on bookshelves before the shop opened. And at the end of 3 weeks, they took me on permanently. And I spent 3 years there developing my career until I was managing the ground floor of a large bookshop in Coventry, doing all the buying and the selling, which I absolutely loved because I got to see all the books as they were coming in. And so I had this real thirst for knowledge. And then I happened to be in a pub with a group of friends who worked for IBM. And one of the managers said, you'd be just like a breath of fresh air. Why don't you come and work for IBM? So I did. And I joined having had management experience, but in a retail environment. And almost instantly, I realized that I was a fish out of water because in 1993, I was one of about 5 women in an office of 1,500 men. Mm. And I thought that was normal because I'd never been in an office before. And I was told, you'll never have a career because you're a woman, and you'll never have a career because you're not technical. And I'd done a French degree, and nearly everybody else had done either maths or computer science. And I thought, well, I can either buy into that and not have a career, or I can leave, or I can forge a career in my own way. And so I forged a career in my own way, which I guess when you think back was entrepreneurial but within an organization. But I then went and spent 17 years in IBM. I had 17 jobs. I had 17 managers. And I did the things that nobody else knew how to do. And in the first probably 6 to 12 months, they kept giving me technical things to do. And I kept thinking, this is really dull. And I kept begging people. I could see that there were managers going off to visit clients. And I said to somebody, can't I go with you? And so one of the managers took me. And the clients loved me because I was this breath of fresh air. I was a young woman. I was vibrant. I wasn't a typical systems programmer sat in an office. And so they then decided that if they put me between the customer and the technical support teams, that I could effectively translate, which interestingly, when I was doing a French degree, I always wanted to be a translator. Yeah. And so that's what I started doing, which is very much the work that I do today, because today I'm working with a herd of horses.
Yeah. So let me know. I say this is fascinating. So, a lot of people say that people in the world of technology have trouble communicating their excitement about whatever technology is. So you were kind of like the acceptable face of IBM and meetings wherever you went, if you like, because you were less techy, more relatable. Is that the skill you were bringing to them? Able to talk normal to them?
I think, well, I'm not sure I could, because I didn't understand the language of business other than 3 years in the retail industry. So I guess I had customer relationship skills. So I knew how customers thought, although I knew how consumers, so I'd been working B2C rather than B2B, but I had an understanding of managing a customer relationship. So I had that skill, and I had the ability to translate. And so the clients would tell me what they wanted to do with their business, and I didn't really understand it. And I'd try and work out how I communicated that to the techies and then back again. And so I became a service manager in the days when service management didn't really exist as a profession. And so I was one of the first in IBM to be a service manager. And of course, it's now a big profession in lots of industries, but always translating. And so I suppose, I'm not sure whether I was more relatable or just young and vibrant.
Okay. Right.
and lots of techies in 1990 weren't.
Yeah, but I mean, in any case, you said that you had multiple roles over multiple years, almost like finding the gaps, if you like, in what IBM maybe didn't have in terms of skills, and sort of filling them out, including the customer relationship skills. I mean, that's quite a long time to stay in any organization. I mean, and I understand what you're saying about sort of finding your way by doing sort of lots of different things. But did a moment come then when you felt, I'm not sure I can find my way anymore? Or did you just think, actually, I've had a good stint, this isn't for me anymore?
I think because I really bought into IBM's strategy. So IBM's strategy at the time was all about, and probably still a variation of this, but it was always about using technology to support humanity on the planet. So at one point, their strategy was something like everyone on the planet should have access to fresh drinking water using technology, smart cities, smarter planet, that kind of thing. So I always bought into, there's a bigger vision. This was never about just managing tech. It was always about improving society through the use of technology. And I always bought into that at its core. And so every job that I ever did, I looked for, what's the value in what I'm doing? So even when I was running a cost management program and reducing cost by consolidating data centers, I was saving jobs, because for every £100,000 we saved in non-people cost with data center cost, we saved a job. So I was always looking for, what's the value that I'm bringing to society? And I think over a period of time, my career developed and developed until I thought, I was working 80 hours a week. I was in a different country in Europe every week. And I did that for the last 4 years of my career. And if I'm really honest, I was burnt out without realizing it. And it was only when I left that I realized how burnt out I actually was. Because that 80-hour week, flying on a plane to a different country every week, is not sustainable long term. And in parallel, I trained as a coach in 2007. So I've been coaching people for about 3 or 4 years alongside my day job, just for fun. Again, it was about enhancing the lives and the skills of people around me. And then I came to a point where I thought, I'll take a year's sabbatical because I'm quite tired. And at the end of that sabbatical, I thought, I don't really want to go back. So that was when I didn't go back, and I set up a leadership and coaching business.
Okay, and we'll get on to that in just a second. I'm just interested in this very strong theme of what value am I bringing to society in coaching, what value am I bringing, and so on. You sound a bit very sort of like the way people often describe Generation Z these days, the young people coming through who always are working with a purpose and so on. Maybe you were an early prototype of that generation. That I don't think a lot of sorry.
I'm always ahead of the curve. I'm nearly always 5 or 6 years ahead. And nearly always people will say, don't be ridiculous, and squash my ideas. And then 5 to 10 years later, that becomes mainstream.
But that's interesting itself, that you were sort of thinking ahead, but maybe you weren't consciously thinking like that at the time. Maybe it's in reflection that you've gone. But anyway, so here we are. You're at that moment where you were about to set up this business. What made you take the leap, if you like, into doing it? Because it's quite a big step. Or did you not see it as a big step? Maybe you just thought it was a natural evolution for you.
A lot of people say to me, oh, you're really courageous, you take big steps. And I think I'm probably naive because I never see them as big steps. I see them as a natural evolution of there's the next step. And I'm not afraid to take a leap into the unknown.
And if you're not seeing it as a sort of as something to be fearful of, I mean, a lot of people do. A lot of people are standing at that exact point that you were standing at, and maybe they don't make the leap, or somebody else offers them a job and they go back into corporate land. I mean, were you deciding consciously to go and do this, or at the time were you just thinking, well, I don't know quite what I want to do, but hey ho, let's just jump forward?
I think because I took a year's sabbatical, so I had a lot of reflection time. And also during that year, I did a year-long leadership program, which is the kind of program, I call it a leadership program, but it's one of those where it strips you back to nothing. And you really examine, who am I? Who am I in relationship? What's my purpose in the world? What am I here to do? And at the end of that year, it became clear that what it was that I wanted to do, I couldn't continue to do it in IBM. I could have a bigger impact outside of IBM than I could in IBM.
So here we are then, you've made the decision. Day one, were you just sort of sitting there drumming your fingers on the desk thinking, what now? Or did you have a plan? A lot of people look into the sort of, actually a lot of the success of a business really starts with how you start off. I mean, how did you start off?
Doing the same thing that I've always done, fly by the seat of my pants and hope for the best.
Okay.
And of course, with that, some intelligence behind it and some thought and a loose idea and a plan, but more of a vision than a plan. Mm-hmm. Because for me, it starts with the vision of why am I setting up a leadership and coaching business? And the reason why was because there were times when I didn't thrive. Most of the time, I absolutely loved my time in IBM. I mean, most people leave their career when they're at rock bottom and they're running away from something that they really dislike. I left my career at a point where I really loved it, but I also knew that I was moving towards a vision that was bigger than I could have in IBM. And my vision was to enable people to thrive at work. And I could see that many people weren't thriving, that the corporate life and structure doesn't work for everybody. It works really well for some and not for others. And what I wanted was to give people the skills to be able to live and work in harmony with themselves and with each other.
Okay, so which year are we in now? Where are we in
2010.
2010. And of course, this business, of course, had some quite unique features to it, as I understand. Maybe tell the listeners who haven't heard of you before what that was all about.
Well, when I left IBM in 2010, I set up a fairly generic leadership and coaching business, and I ran that for a year. The bit that I've glossed over was that when I was 30, I decided to ride again, and I rode for 6 weeks, fell off, broke 9 ribs, broke my shoulder blade in each corner, and had a collapsed lung.
So those 6 riding lessons that you had that you hated at the start, they had they not done you much good, or you'd forgotten about them by that point?
Well, I think what I was doing when I was 30 was I was riding the way I was living my life, which was in the fast lane. Mm-hmm. So I'd had 6 lessons when I was 9 years old. I had 6 when I was 30. And I think by about lesson 4, I was jumping logs in a field that were 2 foot high, which is way beyond the capability that I was at for riding. Mm. And yet I was doing it. I was being encouraged to do it by the riding school, and I was doing it, but not very successfully. So on the 6th one, I had a terrible accident. And then I had 2 other serious incidents around horses, one of them where a horse nearly killed my dog. And at that point, I actually became terrified of horses. So by the time I set up my leadership and coaching business, I was terrified of horses and wouldn't go in a field with one. So fast forward, ran a leadership and coaching business for a year, and I was coaching a group of directors in an organization on a program called Challenge the Status Quo, which now sounds fairly generic, but in 2010, everybody told me I couldn't call a leadership program Challenge the Status Quo because that was too out there for its time. And it was all about being bold and courageous in your leadership. And I challenged them to go and overcome their fear of something. And because I'm a big believer in walking my talk, I went and overcame my fear of horses. And in 5 minutes, I overcame my fear. And in 2 hours, I learned, how do I stay in relationship with someone or something that I find intimidating? So whether that's somebody in a boardroom banging their fist on the table, swearing at me, or whether it's a 600-kilogram horse pushing me around in an arena, what I realized when we're scared is we tend to either fight or flight or sometimes freeze. But if you think about when we engage in conflict or we have disagreements with people, we either up the ante and we try and prove the other person that I'm right and you're wrong, and they're doing the same, or we disconnect and disengage. And both of them result in a broken relationship. Mm-hmm. And organizations are full of those broken relationships. And what I learned in 2 hours was to stay in what appeared to be a polarized relationship and to respect the other person, or in this case, a horse, and also respect my own opinion. And even though they're polarized, how do we stay together and work it out? And if you think about Brexit as a great example, where nobody ever persuaded their mates in the pub to vote the other way, but that's what everybody did. Everybody engaged in a fight or they disconnected. I mean, families even broke up over Brexit because we don't know how to respect each other through our differences of opinion. That's what I learned in 2 hours with a horse. Right. And that blew me away.
So there you are. And I mean, it's one thing to sort of get a set of messages, for yourself, like, this terror, you being terrified of horses, age so 30 to suddenly within a couple of hours overcoming that. But then it's another thing to then think about, well, how do I apply this and create a business model out of it? I mean, that's what I'm interested in, the next step, if you like, as to how you did that.
Well, the next step was that I then went and trained with somebody who was doing this work with horses to develop leaders and teams. And I did it out of curiosity because I'd learned so much in 2 hours. I thought, what else is there to learn? And so I trained in this work with no intention of delivering it, but just out of curiosity. And the day I finished my training, I was driving home and my first client rang me up and said, can you help me with this team? Here's the problem. And everything that this person spoke about was what I'd spent 5 days doing. So I said, are you up for something wacky? And he said, yes, what? And I said, horses. And so I sold him a 2-day workshop with horses. And from that day on, I put a page on my website saying leadership with horses, and clients just kept coming. So I did what any sane person does. I bought a horse.
Yes. It's a good start. Yeah.
It's a good start. And we had a lot of dramas, as you can probably imagine, because what I knew about horses would fit on a postage stamp. And so I had lots of dramas around, how do I lead the horse? How do I continue to be courageous, even though I have no clue what I'm doing? And actually, the idea for my book, Leading Through Uncertainty, began in 2011 when I first led a horse. But everybody shut down the word uncertainty because that was too uncomfortable and too out there for people. Yeah. And so I wrote a book called Leadership Beyond Measure, where I explored what are some of the things that I learned around horses, around being courageous, having compassion, trust, respect, using our energy, that kind of thing. And then clients just kept coming. So I built my herd and now I have a herd of 4 horses.
Okay. We'll get on to the development and growth of that business. I want to go back to that moment where you sold the leadership development course to the guy after having done your training. I mean, did you put the phone down and think, what have I just done? Or did you think, no, that's good, it feels right, and I want to do it, it's just a question of how? Were you very confident in what you're doing, or did you have a doubt as to whether you could deliver what you basically just sold?
Both, I think, because I think if we don't have any doubt, then there's a danger that we become arrogant. So yes, there was doubt, but there was also confidence of I can do this and it feels right. I'm very led by my intuition, and I am very intuitive. So if it feels right, it nearly always is right. But I'll also map that. I'll also in parallel to that, there has to be some logic and some reasoning for it. So I am a kind of entrepreneurial creative, but I'm also looking for what's the science behind this and what makes this tangible and real. So I wasn't naive enough to just go and find a horse and deliver it on my own. I went back to the person I trained with and I asked him to deliver it with me so that we were using his experience and my leadership skills and business skills and collaborated together.
Okay, so let's talk about the development of the business then. As you got along, you say you've got 4 horses now, but has what your offer been sort of during that time? Has it essentially remained the same, or has it evolved? I mean, first of all, can you talk about the secret sauce, if you like, or the product? I mean, what is it that the horses are teaching us about leadership, and also what has that expanded? Has that spun off into different things that you perhaps didn't imagine at the start?
Absolutely, yes. So horses respond based on our non-verbal behavior and communication. So what you're thinking, you're feeling, your energy, your emotions, horses respond based on that. So if, for example, you're feeling scared, but you bounce up to the horse and say, and pretend not to be scared, the horse will sense there's a mixed message. So they'll sense the incongruence in your behavior and refuse to engage. If you go up to the horse and say, I'm feeling scared, be gentle with me, help me, generally they'll come with you because they understand fear and they're used to leading through fear themselves. So what they're looking for is, are you being clear what you're asking them to do? Is there a strong relationship based on trust and respect? Do they have free will over whether they engage or not and how they engage? And are you congruent with your behavior? And if all of that is aligned, they'll engage willingly. So that we're really fine-tuning leadership and team behaviours and really getting underneath the surface of what's often going on subconsciously for people. So often people will say to me, I'm not stressed, but actually they're not calm and grounded enough for the horses to engage with them. So just because they don't feel stressed is probably because their stress levels are so used to it being quite high that although they're not grounded, they probably don't know how to ground themselves. So we're working with often unconscious and subconscious patterns of behaviour. And as a result, we create massive shifts in people's behaviour. That's the first thing.
So that's a really great explanation. And has that meant that the product, for want of a better word, has evolved because you're dealing with people's subconscious, conscious behaviour? Sometimes that's not just a leadership thing, though, is it? I mean, that's just a human behaviour thing as well in a wider context.
Yeah, and I call it leadership and teamwork, and ultimately it's about human behaviour, because those human behaviours are the things that enable us to be effective in the workplace or in our family life too. So in the early days, when most of my work was with senior leaders and exec teams, and in the early days in 2011, most of my work would be with an all-male team. So over the last 11, 12 years, the structure of a senior leadership team has dramatically changed from all male to all male with one woman to much more diverse and much more balanced, and then including things like race and gender and all the other demographics and behavioural characteristics. So the work has evolved to meet the structure of a senior leadership team, and also the economic conditions and political instability, because I mentioned that I wanted to write a book on leading through uncertainty 10 years ago. When I talked to clients about uncertainty, they shut it down and said, no, we like to be in control. And yet fast forward to Brexit, and the word uncertainty became adopted widely in the press, and then clients started to accept that there was uncertainty. And at that point I thought, great, I'm going to write the book on uncertainty now. And so I was always adapting to where's the appetite, because I'd been talking about uncertainty for about 6 years when Brexit came along. And yet I'd had to temper the way that I used my language, because otherwise uncertainty was just too uncomfortable for people.
I mean, uncertainty, I suppose, got another push along the road through the pandemic, which I suppose, might not have been so good in terms of of your business, perhaps because people couldn't come out and about and sort of get on horses and ride around in that way. But nevertheless, the the concept of uncertainty, has become very established now, and it's kind of quite acceptable to talk about that. Just thinking about the uncertainty for maybe some of our listeners, for example, as times change, products evolve. Some of our listeners will have started a business, maybe had some initial success, but found themselves having to evolve. And sometimes evolution doesn't come naturally to people. They think that maybe they've got a winning formula and they're going to stick to it. But it strikes me that you've got like an evolving formula, that horses are at the center, but you're constantly are you a tinkerer with the offer, and you're just evolving it and changing it around and so on? I'm just interested in the lessons for those people listening, perhaps.
I think it is. Can I just be really clear? We don't ride the horses, so all my work's done on the ground with horses.
Yes.
But in terms of evolving, I think it's about adapting to what is the client wanting, where's the greatest need, because ultimately, a business success is dependent on understanding who your customer is and what they're wanting. So I'm not selling a lovely day out with horses in a field. I'm selling a result for a client that results in either a team communicating more effectively, which results in either a growth of their business or turning a loss into a profit, for example. So I always start with, before we even get to the horses, my first conversation with the clients, they come and say, can we work with horses? And my answer to that is, well, tell me about your business. What are you trying to achieve? And what's the makeup of the team? And what are the challenges of that team in achieving those business goals? And then I can look at, well, how do the horses support that learning and that growth that's required for the business growth? So I think with any business, we've always got to go back to, what does the customer want and need? And is my solution fit for purpose? Because if it's not, then either I need to give it up or I need to change it. And so I'm always adapting what I'm doing, because actually the makeup of teams and organizations and the market conditions is always changing. So, which was why in the pandemic, on one level, it was an utter disaster for my business. My doors were shut, or my gate was shut, on and off for 2 years. There were pockets of we're opening and then we're closing. But then even when we opened, clients didn't come because the risk was we were going to go into lockdown again. Now, that first week, I'll be honest, I cried for about 3 hours on the first day, and then thought, right, I better crack on and find a way, because I'd still got horses to feed and keep alive. So either I gave up or I found a way to generate income to feed my horses and keep them alive. And that really focuses your attention. And so for me, it was looking at, well, what have I got? What resources have I got? What skills and experience have I got? And what's the issue that clients have got? Well, of course, uncertainty. I've written a book on uncertainty, so there was a natural fit there. And so I spent the next 6 months online delivering masterclasses on leading through uncertainty and coaching people around their emotional responses to uncertainty. So I think in answer to your question, it's about constantly looking at, where is the client and what are they wanting and needing, and what am I delivering, whether it's a product or a service, and does it match what they want and need? And if it doesn't, we've got to tweak it. So I think the only way is to continually evolve and tinker with products and services.
Okay, that's a great answer. It's also applicable to any business, that's something that people can learn. What are you really not very good at as an entrepreneur? Are there certain aspects? It's a multidisciplinary thing, so there must be things that you loathe doing. I mean, things for me include sort of like the bookkeeping side of things, and I've long since outsourced that. But everybody has something that they know they should be either spending less time or doing, or is just well out of their hair by giving it to somebody else to do. What's yours?
Well, when I started, the thing I loved to do was coach and do the work with the horses. And then I very quickly realized that there's sales and marketing and finance and admin and strategy and operations and process. And then as you grow with people, as managing a team, I think one of the challenges I have is I'm a bit jack of all trades, master of none. And I've always been like that. And actually the success of my career has been that. But I think the things that I don't, what would I like to do? I would love to spend all of the summer outdoors in the field with the horses, coaching clients and working with teams. That's what I love to do. The thing I hated the most was selling, because it just made me feel sick in the pit of my stomach. I had multiple sales coaches. I had ones that taught me the theory. I had ones that coached me and supported me. And the thing that flipped the switch for me on sales was when somebody said to me, but you're a coach, you know how to listen and have a conversation. Surely that's what sales is. And I went, oh, for about 8 years, I found it deeply uncomfortable. And now I can just have a conversation, and that just makes it so much easier. So now I quite enjoy sales because I've made it, again, it's about making it work for me.
I think there's a lot of people who haven't sold. There's often a misconception as to what selling is. And I went from media as an editor into the PR business, where I was head of a department trying to win PR contracts. And I started to behave as I felt a seller should behave. And then somebody who I'd been working with previously as an editor, who was now a potential client, just stopped me and said, Trevor, you've got one mouth and two ears, and use them in that proportion. And you should be listening and consulting. You will sell through your knowledge. And I guess it's the same in your sort of business, that actually that you sell through listening and diagnosing and being a good consultant, skills you picked up at IBM and probably in lots of other places as well. So I totally understand that. Now, what is it that you would say on the other side of things? Probably, and this is always a big question for our listeners, who sometimes listen to everything we say and then they say, yeah, but what is it that really gave them the confidence to succeed in what they did? What is it? Is there something that you said that kind of, when you're sort of like lying there thinking, yes, I can do this, is there an innate confidence that you have in, or a learned confidence that you've sort of picked up over the years that kind of keeps driving you on?
I think it's a learned confidence, and it's a little bit innate. But I think if I think back to when I was 19 and I was doing a French degree, I spent a year in France. And that was deeply uncomfortable, to get on a plane on my own for the first time, when actually people didn't get on planes 35 years ago that much. So it was a really big deal to go to a country where I spoke the language, but not brilliantly, and to live and work there for a year. And within 3 weeks of being there, a French girl that I happened to be sharing a flat with said, we're taking a party of school children skiing tomorrow, and we're an instructor short. Will you come and be an instructor? And I said, well, I've never been on skis before. And she said, that's fine. She said, these are 5-year-olds. It's their first lesson. I'll show you how to do a snowplow in the flat on her skis. And she said, all you need to do is play games with them. So I said, okay, I'll do it. Yeah. And I think this is for me the naivety piece, because what I didn't realize was how hard it was actually going to be once I got on the snow. But within 3 months, by the end of the season, I was going down red runs with the 10-year-olds and doing parallel turns and all self-taught. So I think one of my core skills is I'll give something a go and I'm willing to fail. That doesn't mean fail is easy, because it makes me wince and it's deeply uncomfortable, but I'm willing to give it a go. I think it's that. And I think the more that you give things a go that you don't know how to do, actually, the more comfortable it is being out of your comfort zone. And the more you do that, then the more confidence you have. So I'm not sure that I'm necessarily confident so much as I'm willing to give it a go.
Yeah, I think to me, it's about trusting yourself to leave the comfort zone, the place that is apparently a great thing by being a comfort zone, but everyone seems to be trying to leave it in some way, and sort of pushing themselves out. And I think the lack of fear, if you like, is a key part of that. Now, for listeners, who want to hear more from you or want to come and talk to you and so on, just tell us a little bit about how they can get in contact with you. I'm particularly interested in those books that you mentioned. Listeners won't be able to see this, but I can see that you've got some of those books behind you at the moment, on your bookshelf. So could you maybe just say a little bit about those, and also about how people could get hold of you if they wanted to?
Yeah, so the easiest way to find me is on my website, which is judejennison.com. And there you can see my books. I've written 3 books. The first one, Leadership Beyond Measure, was about my journey with horses, leading through uncertainties, looking at what are the challenges and emotional responses we have to uncertainty, and therefore how do we navigate that. And the third one is called Opus, the hidden dynamics of team performance. And that's looking about what are the non-verbal behaviors that we have in teams. So what's not being said and how does that impact the team's performance? All of those are on Amazon, but they're also, there's details of those on my website as well. And I'm on LinkedIn, and my name, Jude Jennison, is relatively easy to find on all the social media platforms because there's only one of me, so that makes life easy.
Yes, there's only one Jude Jennison, and what a great person and interviewee she is. I love how Jude was terrified of horses, even into her 30s, but somehow turned her fear not only into something positive, but also something that was life-changing for her, as well as being a business. She engaged with the horses and the results sort of blew her and everybody else away. And I was also very taken by her lack of fear throughout that interview. She wasn't afraid to take a leap, give it a go. And she's brilliant on the subject of tackling your doubts and using your intuition to drive yourself quickly on to a more confident approach. So thank you to Jude, and thank you for tuning in. And if you enjoyed today's episode, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate and review through your usual podcast provider. And if you want to find out more about the Merri-Cast or our business Merriborn Media, you can find us on LinkedIn. So don't forget to join us for the next episode. But until then, thanks for listening.